All right, today we are diving deep into a theory that's been making some serious waves online. It's this idea that XRP might be heading for what they're calling a massive supply shock. We're going to break down the arguments from the source material and see exactly what's behind this super bold prediction. Let's get right into it. So here's the big question right up front. Could an XRP supply shock really be on the horizon? The whole theory we're looking at today argues that, yeah, a perfect storm of factors is brewing, one that could seriously squeeze the available supply of XRP and, well, you know what that could do to the price. And this is the number that gets everybody talking, $50. The thesis literally claims this supply shock could rocket XRP's price up into that $50 plus territory. Now that is a gigantic leap, so let's unpack how they even get to a number like that. Okay, first up, let's examine the core arguments for this coming XRP supply shock. So what could actually kick this whole thing off? We're going to look at the catalysts that could allegedly trigger this massive price surge. The first big catalyst, according to this thesis, involves the highest levels of government. It all kicked off when a former U.S. president name-dropped XRP when talking about the nation's strategic reserves. The source of this theory believes that was absolutely no accident. And if we dig a little deeper, the source suggests this wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark. Nope. They point to a lobbyist connected to Ripple and look at the timing. It happened right as the supply on exchanges was drying up. It all kind of feeds into their central belief that XRP was actually designed from the ground up to help the US dollar move faster and cheaper all around the globe. Okay, catalyst number 2 is all about institutional money, the big money. The theory points to financial giants, like BlackRock, and basically says, hey, just look at the wild success of the Bitcoin ETFs. They see that as a perfect blueprint for what could be coming for XRP. And this, of course, leads to a really key question that the source brings up. If these Bitcoin ETFs are such a massive moneymaker for a company like BlackRock, why on earth isn't there an XRP ETF yet? I mean, from the outside looking in, it looks like a huge opportunity just being left on the table. So, the source speculates on a couple of possibilities here. The first is that there's already a powerful non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, signed between Ripple and BlackRock, keeping everything hush-hush. The other possibility, that something is, and I'm quoting here, seriously wrong with this picture, because it just seems like such an obvious business move they're not making. The third catalyst is this idea that the entire crypto market is just growing up. As the CEO of CryptoQuant put it, crypto is no longer under a nanny state. The argument is that as we leave the Wild West era behind, serious investors are going to start looking for assets with clear real-world utility, which, in the source's view, points them straight to XRP. Okay, so we've talked about the why. Now let's get to the when. The source actually lays out a very, very specific 17-month timeline for how this whole thing could play out. They break this prediction down into 3 phases. First up, for about 6 months, is the accumulation phase, where the price is expected to grind its way up to $5. Then comes the realization phase, where supply starts to vanish, pushing the price up to $15. And then finally, the mania phase, where that supply shock really hits its peak and could potentially send XRP flying to $50 or maybe even higher. But, and this is a huge but, the source adds a major caveat. They say this 17-month timeline is actually their conservative model. They argue that once retail investors get that classic FOMO, that fear of missing out, and the big institutions start scrambling to get their piece, this whole thing could happen way, way faster. Now, to really get why this thesis is so incredibly bullish on XRP, you kind of have to understand why it's so bearish on Bitcoin. So let's take a look at their argument for why Bitcoin's best days might be behind it. And the source's comparison is pretty brutal. They basically label Bitcoin's technology as too slow, too expensive, while calling XRP fast, super cheap. They see Bitcoin as being at risk from quantum computing, while XRP is purpose-built for the future of tokenization. But their most pointed criticism, well, it's about the role of the everyday investor. And it really all comes down to this one powerful quote. The source claims that to the Bitcoin insiders, retail investors are just exit liquidity. In other words, you're just the people they sell to at the top, leaving you holding the bag when the price inevitably comes crashing down. It's a really cynical view that the system is basically rigged against the little guy. So if you believe all of this, what's the actual game plan? Let's dive into the investment philosophy behind this whole thesis. which they call being a utility maxi. Now, an obvious question pops up here. If you're so convinced, should you just go all in on XRP? Well, surprisingly, the source's answer is no, and that actually reveals a much more nuanced way of looking at the market. See, the source doesn't describe themselves as an XRP maxi. Instead, they call themselves a utility maxi. And what that means is they're an investor who looks beyond just one coin. They build a diversified portfolio of projects that all have real, tangible use cases and strong ecosystems. It's not about loyalty to one coin. And here's what that looks like in practice. Instead of just putting all their chips on XRP, the source's portfolio includes other utility-focused projects like XDC, Hedera, Stellar, and Quant. It's all about spreading your bets across multiple projects that they see as being foundational for the future. So the key takeaway from their strategy isn't about finding that one magic coin that's going to make you rich. It's about betting on a whole team of projects, a handful of different cryptocurrencies that are all focused on building the financial infrastructure of tomorrow. And that leaves us with one final and I think crucial question. This whole supply shock thesis, it's a bet that real-world utility is what will eventually win the day. But is that what really drives this market? Will the future be defined by actual utility, or will powerful stories and narratives, like the one that's been built around Bitcoin, continue to be king? That's the real question, isn't it?